Welcome to Fix It Fair at Home. Thank you for joining us. I'm Wing, one of the coordinators with the Fix It Fairs, which are City of Portland, Oregon community resource events. Before we get started, workshop attendees can hover over your screen and you'll see a Q&A button. Press that and you'll see a pop-up box where you can ask questions and we'll make sure they get answered. We're also broadcasting on Facebook Live. If you're watching on Facebook while we are live and leave a comment, we'll see it and make sure that's answered too. And with that, let's welcome our friends from the City of Portland, Office of Community and Civic Life.
Hello, my name is Daniel Franco Nunez, and I am a Community Safety Coordinator at the Office of Community and Civic Life, specifically in North Team, which means we serve the communities north of I-84.
I'm Jacob Rostoff. I'm a Community Safety Coordinator also with the Office of Community and Civic Life, and I work with Danielle in the North communities.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen so you can all see what I'm seeing, and then we can start this pedestrian safety presentation. So this presentation is for this week or this month, obviously. It's also in collaboration with the Department of Transportation and the Portland Bureau of Transportation. Jacob and I were trained recently on this information, so we would give it to other community members and participants. But the materials here involve city code and state policy, and we'll talk a little bit about those later on. So we already did the initial introductions. We ask that you take the demographic survey. It helps us know a little bit better who we're serving and also who we aren't and where we can improve on those situations. We'll copy and paste it into the comment section at the end of the training. There are our email addresses for Jacob and I. We'll have, as was mentioned earlier, the opportunity for question and answer. But if for any reason you think of a question later on or would like to contact us for other information or other inquiries, those are our emails where we can be reached. So why does this training matter? Why are we talking about pedestrian safety? Well, it turns out that traffic crashes are the #1 cause of unintentional injury and death in the US for those between the ages of 5 and 24, which are obviously people that are very mobile, very active in our neighborhoods. It is also an important thing happening in Oregon. In 2018, there were 35 fatalities. 16 of those were pedestrians. So almost half of traffic fatalities are pedestrians. And over 4,600 people in our community were injured in car crashes in Portland alone. Traffic safety is an area where we can make a difference in our communities and where we can care for our communities and make them simply safer by knowing the rules and how to follow them. So there's a few legalese terms here. One means ignorance of the law won't excuse you from the consequences of the law. That is ignorantia juris non excusat. It's a legal principle that person cannot say, I was simply unaware of the law, therefore you can't give me that ticket, you can't give me that fine. Hopefully doesn't actually involve somebody's death. As an Oregonian, as a community member, you are responsible for knowing the laws that apply to you. The reason we're talking about pedestrian law for both drivers and pedestrians is because pedestrians' death have been a rising across all of the US. And Portland is no exception. They've also been on the climb here. By being responsible and responsible in the way we use our roads, can help save lives of pedestrians and those families. Maybe we'll never know whose life we saved. Maybe it's our own. And traffic safety is one of the easiest and best ways to make sure you make a difference in your community. Most often when the police or myself receive complaints about traffic issues in the community, it's a community member themselves who are causing the problem. For example, a community member might be speeding. Most traffic crashes happen 25 miles or less from a person's home. Sometimes familiarity breeds complacency. People think they know the street, they know the neighborhood kids, they know who's out and about, and they think they'll always be the same. But obviously this is not true, things happen. Where we are most familiar, driving or walking, is where we don't tend to pay as much attention. Many of you drive. Ideally, we'd be talking about what everybody's mode of transportation is, but there's no interaction right now, so we'll just move on. But in Portland, we like being a bike-friendly city. We also like being a fairly mobile city. So there's lots of bikers, there's lots of people walking the streets, there's joggers. Here we have an example of crosswalks, both marked, unmarked, mid-block crosswalks. So we're gonna go over these things little by little. We can dig deeper into the responsibilities of when it comes to pedestrian law. So here's the driver's responsibility. Sorry. All right. So stop and remain stopped at any crosswalk marked or unmarked until people walking have cleared your lane, plus the lane next to you. For me, this becomes a little difficult when I'm turning and there's a couple cars behind me and I feel like a jerk for holding up the line. But if we want to be safe and protect those walking, it's not just when people have cleared your lane, it's when they've cleared the lane next to you. So now we're going to go on to the little infographic that will show you a little bit about the cars and pedestrians. All right, so as a recap, if you're the red car, you don't want to turn until they've gotten to this lane up here. So that means waiting till they pass in front of your car and the lane next to you. When turning at a traffic signal, stop and remain stopped until people are crossing, have cleared the lane you are turning into, and 6 feet of the next lane. So let's check this out. So you see where the blue car is turning left onto. There's a pedestrian coming by. So you need to wait till they clear the lane you intend to turn into and 6 feet of the next lane. Now the white car is turning right. Same thing. So till basically they're halfway through the intersection if it's a 4-lane street. This is different if it's a 2-lane street. If it's a 2-lane street, you're essentially waiting till they get to the other side of the street. In a school zone, you gotta stop and remain stopped as directed by crossing guards. For people who are blind, using a white cane or guide dog, stop and remain stopped until they are completely across the roadway. So for people that require extra time or space, example, cane or dog, just wait till they cross the entire street. Okay. So in Oregon, every intersection is a crosswalk if a pedestrian crosses at an unmarked crosswalk. An intersection with no crosswalk lines painted on it is still a crosswalk. So that's when we say unmarked crosswalk. And that doesn't mean that a pedestrian simply choosing to walk anywhere down the block is a crosswalk. We'll talk about what an unmarked crosswalk is and what a marked crosswalk is. All right, so here's our first example. Let me go to the little, okay. So how many crosswalks do you see in this intersection? Obviously, none are marked, but there's actually 4 crosswalks in this intersection. All right, those are the crosswalks. none of these are marked, but they're still crosswalks. Now let's try the next photo. How many crosswalks are in this intersection? 1, 2. What about this one? 1, 2, 3. All right. Now, if a driver might be fined up to $250 for not stopping for a pedestrian. If a pedestrian is in one of these crosswalks waiting to cross and you don't stop and a police officer sees that, you can be fined up to $250 for that. This next photo is a photo of Stark between 125th and 126th. The important thing to distinguish in this one is that down here on the lower left and lower right, those are driveways. Driveways are not crosswalks, all right? At the end point in rectangle, in the middle, you see the lines and the little island. That is a crosswalk, and that is a marked crosswalk. So besides the marked crosswalk, you have the unmarked one, which is the end of this block. And you do see the little yellow strips down here, which show you that somebody can be waiting there. And you have this other crosswalk at the other end of the block. The middle between the zebra stripes and the crosswalk is not a crosswalk. Neither is the other side of the driveway or this other driveway. Only at the end, the middle, and the other end are actual crosswalks. Now, rectangular rapid flashing beacons are in place to alert drivers to the presence of pedestrians. These don't change the driver's responsibility. It's just a warning device. So sometimes people see these things flashing and they know that there's a pedestrian walking, so they stop. Even if those lights are not flashing, it doesn't mean you don't have to stop. It's not a red light, it's not a traffic light, it's simply an additional warning light, typically put in intersections where there have been high fatalities or accidents. So those are simply an extra way of warning drivers to be careful. But whether those lights are flashing or not, if a pedestrian enters that lane, the driver's responsibility is to stop. They're repeating a little bit. Okay. And this is a close-up view of that. Now we're going to talk about the driver's responsibilities. These are covered in Oregon ORS Chapter 811. We're going to talk about intent to cross. So it's not super complicated, but it's important for the drivers to know what to watch out for with pedestrians there. As we mentioned in the previous slide, look out for flashing beacons at specific locations, because these will only turn on if the pedestrian has pushed the button and is going to start waiting. So look out for flashing beacons. Respond when you see a flashing beacon by looking for bicycles or pedestrians. So right here, we see that the beacon is flashing. The person has entered the intersection, so obviously she's in there. Stop behind the bold white line in advance of the crosswalk and remain stopped until the pedestrians have cleared the lane and the adjacent lane, as was mentioned previously. It's really important, and this often comes down to like simple habits that people develop as they become drivers, but stopping behind those bold white lines. We see it all the time where people actually stop on top of the line, which means the hood of their car and a section of the front is in the crosswalk. You want to stop well behind those lines. Again, if you're dealing with somebody who might be in a wheelchair, who might be blind using a cane, you're encroaching on their space that they have for their safety. So remembering to stop behind those bold white lines. And even after the pedestrian has cleared the road, proceed with caution. Sometimes there might be somebody else trying to make it across as well, somebody's friend or just another pedestrian. So as the person in the car, continue with caution. Did you know? By law, a pedestrian is in a crosswalk when any part of the pedestrian moves into the roadway at a crosswalk with the intent to cross it. So we're going to show you a picture right here. So the question here is this person showing intent to cross? The answer is no. She is waiting on her phone. She's not looking across the street, which doesn't mean that some people don't do this and then try to cross right away. But from Oregon law standpoint, she is not showing intent to cross. None of her body is in the crosswalk. She's not looking in either direction. So no, there's no intent to cross for this particular example. But how about this one? This is a clear example of somebody that is waiting to be given permission to cross. So you can tell that they are waiting, they're looking both ways. They're showing intent to cross the street. Here, there's another good example. Part of their body, their feet, is already in the road. So they are already actually in traffic, obviously with the intent to cross. And now it's the driver's responsibility to stop. Sometimes we think that we're simply being a nice person by allowing pedestrians to cross, and we are being nice, but we're also following the law.
Hey, Daniel, this is Wing with the Fix It Fair. We do have a question that's come up through Facebook. The question is, when people cross in a marked crosswalk, when the don't walk sign is illuminated, is it still a crosswalk and the driver's responsibility?
Good question. And if the traffic control light is telling the pedestrians not to cross, then at that point, it's the pedestrian's responsibility to obey that traffic control sign, and they should not be crossing. So,
but it is still a crosswalk.
Right, it is a crosswalk, but they shouldn't be using it at that point. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and so that's it for me. I'm gonna mute myself and turn off my camera. And from this point on, my colleague Jacob will take over.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jacob again with the Office of Community and Civic Life, and we're going to talk a little bit about driver responsibility. So as a driver, it is your responsibility to be extra vigilant at dusk, never to pass a stopped vehicle at a crosswalk, try to stop 30 feet before a crosswalk, never block an intersection or crosswalk where pedestrians may be present, be careful of pulling out of driveways or parking spaces. And remember, if you drive a large SUV or truck, it may be more difficult to see pedestrians, particularly children and wheelchair users. So these are your responsibilities, some of your responsibilities as a driver. A lot of people think it's okay to do things like put on makeup, text, eat, fiddle with your phone, and do all kinds of things when you're stopped at an intersection. But intersections are where the most crashes occur. And while most of these are fender benders, pedestrians are vulnerable road users, and what can be just a dent in a car can cause serious injury and even death to a pedestrian. So even if you're stopped at a stoplight, do not engage in distractions. You may be stopped, but it's still not safe to do other things besides driving. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about pedestrian responsibility now. So pedestrians have an obligation to obey all traffic control devices. And briefly, I'm going to talk about the safest place to cross the street. The legal place to cross the street and the safest place to cross the street is an intersection. You have an obligation a responsibility to give a clear indication that you're going to cross at crosswalks at intersections, and to pay attention and not be distracted while walking. Pedestrians do not always have the right of way and can be cited, and you commit the offense of failing to yield to a vehicle if you suddenly leave a curb or other place of safety and move into the path of a vehicle that is so close as to be an immediate hazard. So you do not always have the right of way, and you can be cited for breaking the law regarding right of way yield. So as a pedestrian, it's your responsibility to walk on the sidewalk. And if there's no sidewalk, walk on the shoulder facing traffic. So this is opposite the way many people walk. Do not step out into moving traffic, even if you think you have the right of way, because it's always safest to wait for all vehicles to stop before you go. And be extra vigilant at dusk, wear bright clothing and a flashlight or headlight, especially if it's dark, rainy, foggy, or overcast. And whenever possible, cross the street at an intersection or crosswalk where you have the right of way. And that's per Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 811. If there isn't a crosswalk, it's your responsibility to find a well-lit area where you have the best view of traffic, only to cross when you've looked at all directions and obey all pedestrian signals at intersections. And remember, the walk signals mean if it's white and there's a picture of a person crossing, it's your turn to go and it's safe to cross, but you should still check for traffic. If it's blinking, it's too late to start crossing, but it's okay to continue if you've been crossing. And if it's solid hand, then you have to wait to cross until the next white crossing signal. Lastly, as you're crossing each lane, check to make sure that the driver is stopped. And once all vehicles have stopped, then you can walk and not run. It's also your responsibility to let drivers know you intend to cross by putting out an arm, a foot, or a cane. You need to establish eye contact with drivers if you can. If you're not sure if they see you, then let the car go first. If you don't want to cross, you need to step back from the edge of the roadway. Please stay alert and avoid distractions as a pedestrian. And don't step out from between parked cars. Watch for the cars entering or exiting driveways. And remember, hybrids and electric cars can be very quiet. So every intersection, as Danielle said, is a crosswalk, whether it's marked or not. And if a pedestrian crosses outside an intersection, they have to yield to motor vehicle traffic. So we're going to talk a little bit about who has the right of way in a rectangular rapid flashing beacon crosswalk. So here we have, again, 126 and 127th and Stark. And we have a pedestrian crosswalk, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon crosswalk in the middle of the block. So here you'll see a person who's getting ready to cross, but they're at a driveway. So that's not a place where they have the right of way. They could walk to the middle of the block where the rectangular rapid flashing beacon crosswalk is and cross there. They would have the right of way there. They could walk one block west to 126th and cross Stark Street at 126th from this crosswalk, or they could walk one block east and cross at 127th and Stark at the crosswalk, but they cannot cross starting at a driveway in the middle of the block. So when you're going to use a rectangular rapid flashing beacon as a pedestrian, you push the button to activate the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. You cross into the median or island, like the one we just saw. And then sometimes you have to press a second button once you get to the middle of the street to cross the rest of the street. And RRFB's rectangular rapid flashing beacons don't change a driver's responsibility. It's just a warning device. So you're going to want to always push the button, look to make sure cars have stopped, and then cross. And if you're crossing to a median, check again to see if all the cars have stopped on the other side of the street before you continue. If they've not stopped, then press the button again and make sure cars are stopped before crossing the second half of the street. So that's the rectangular rapid flashing beacon median. And this is where you might press the button again to cross. So one last thought, which is that more Americans have died in car crashes than in both world wars since the year 2000. So that's 535,000 World War deaths, and 624,000 car crash deaths. And that doesn't count injuries. So there's more than 30 million injuries in that time since 2000. The most dangerous thing we do every day is drive and walk. So we brought you this presentation in collaboration with ODOT, but if you have questions or concerns about traffic safety, you can contact ODOT directly at askodot@odot.state.or.us. You can also contact Tiana Tozer. She's the ODOT Region 1 Pedestrian Safety Coordinator. She's at tiana.tozer@odot.state.or.us. And Tiana wants you to know that in August, they offer grants to communities, nonprofits, and governments who are interested in addressing a traffic safety issue through education and outreach. If you're interested in receiving a notice of the opportunity, you can contact the Region 1 Transportation Safety Coordinator at tiana.tozer@odot.state.or.us, and she can help you get engaged with the grant process. So we'll take questions now if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Jacob. This is Wing with Fix It Fair. We do have a question that came in through our Facebook Live. The question is there a recommended age for kids to walk without an adult, say to school, friend's house, etc.? What advice would you give to parents and kids before they start walking alone?
So I don't know the answer to the first question, and we can find out and get back to that person who's asking the question once we are done with the presentation. So I don't know what age is the legal age, or if there's a legal age for walking and crossing alone. I would say for parents, it's important that children understand that your children understand that their lives are at stake and that they could be injured or killed. And that if you're walking to school with them, they need to understand the relevant traffic safety laws before they're allowed to do that on their own. So I don't have an answer for a specific age, but I would say, please make sure your children understand what keeps them safe, what keeps everyone safe, and how they can cross and get to school safely on their own if you're going to let them do that. And we'll research the first question and get back to that person after the presentation. So thank you for those questions.
And we do have one more that came in. Actually, we have a couple more. The first one is, it feels like there are a lot more pedestrian deaths lately. Are there common themes that we can be aware of or that have been identified as why there is an uptick?
So I don't know. I don't have the statistics to answer the question. It always feels like there are people being hurt and killed as pedestrians at a time when there's more people driving and there's more folks out walking about. So we'll need to research that and get back to you. I don't have an answer as to why that is. I think it's just that there's more people in our communities and there's more people moving around independently as pedestrians and as motorists.
Yeah, it ends up being kind of a combination of both. Portland has been one of the top 5 cities for people to move into for like the last 5 years. And I think we can all see that there's been an explosion of population. So when you get people from all over the state with different backgrounds as far as like the laws that they had to follow in their home state versus laws here in Portland, pedestrians who are also aware or not aware of laws and rules here, without everybody being a conscientious, informed member of the city, there's going to be fatalities. And it's something that we need to remember all the time. I bike around Portland, so I know where the usual stop signs for bikers are at, where it's a biker's responsibility to stop. And I also drive around Portland. And so it's happened to me more than once where I know I'm at an intersection where the bicyclists have the stop sign for them to stop. And I'm driving through it and bicyclists don't stop. I also know there's been times where I've been driving where I should have stopped and didn't. So I think it's a responsibility that we all need to be more aware of, take it more seriously. Often in the US, getting your driver's license, your first car is seen as a rite of passage, and having a vehicle or being mobile is also seen as a right, oftentimes more than a responsibility. But it's important for people that are both driving, biking, or walking the streets to know that we're all in a shared space where we all share responsibilities for not just our safety, but the safety of other people in that space as well.
Great, thank you. And we do have one more question from the Facebook Live. Are there more dangerous areas to walk in town? And are things being done to make them less dangerous?
So there are areas that are more and less dangerous, that have more and less crashes. And there are several programs that the Portland Bureau of Transportation has that are working to make those spaces safer. So one example of that is the Safe Routes to Schools program. That program works on creating routes that are safe for children and parents to walk or bike to school by making the areas around schools safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. There are other examples that the Portland Bureau of Transportation has. The Oregon Department of Transportation also has a pedestrian safety programs and opportunities. We discussed Tiana Tozer's grant opportunities for communities that want to work on pedestrian and bicycle safety. So yes, there are places that are more and less dangerous, and there are programs to try to make every part of Portland less dangerous as a pedestrian.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that is all for the Q&A. Thank you again, Daniel and Jacob, for joining us on this live Fix a Fair at Home workshop.